attention here for a second.
Hi, everyone.
Get closer to me, Chris. Come on over.
Oh man, you have a big head.
Hi everyone. I just want to thank everyone for being here this evening for CS. It's the closing event of CS Fall Preview. It's been a whole week of all of our sites in the Corcoran Sunshine portfolio hosting events at their sites and showcasing something new. And we're very proud and happy to be able to unveil this brand new penthouse for all of you to enjoy. The furnishing was all done by Boffy, and the art by Fred Dorfman, who I believe is here somewhere. Mr. Dorfman, if you're here, thank you so much.
Boffy's also here.
And Boffy's here too. Thank you so much. It is beautiful. We are so excited. And I just want to introduce the sales team wherever you are. Here's Blake Weitzberg, our sales director. But where are the rest of you?
Mina's right here. She's selling.
Krista's selling. And Tommaso, our weekend coordinator, is also here. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to turn this over to Blake. We're about to give you a really great special treat with Myles and Ken Jackson here. But before we do, I'm going to let Blake tell you a little bit more about the building.
Hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. We really appreciate you reading all 1,000 emails we sent for the invitation this week. So thank you so much. And just to tell you a little bit about this particular apartment, it is one of our best, in my opinion, penthouses. That's 3,700 square feet, priced at $12 million. It's a 4-bedroom, 4.5 bath, 2 sensational terrace spaces. And it's one of 5 major penthouses that we will be rolling out. We've listed 3 just this morning. So penthouse 17A and penthouse 16B, as well as 17C, where we're standing right now, has been listed. And we are ready for immediate occupancy on most of our floors, if not all of our floors, except for the 2nd floor. So if your buyers are interested in 1 through 5 bedrooms, we fit the bill. If your buyers are looking for immediate occupancy, we're happy to have them. If you're interested in earning a 4% commission, we are very happy to pay you that 4% commission. And we are doing tours 7 days a week. So we're here to answer any questions. We certainly would welcome a preview if you'd like to come back on your own or with your buyers at any point. And our availability list is out in the hall for our penthouses tonight, but also online. It's all up to date. So we welcome you to come back and take an extensive tour of the building. So with that, I'll turn it over to Myles and Ken, and you're in for a real treat. We're very excited to have them both doing this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We hope you like what you see. We spent a great deal of time and effort restoring what is really a New York landmark. We're different. We're different than everybody else because we're brand new, and yet we retain all the old world charm. And we hope we spent a lot of money to make this happen. And I hope you like what you see. Okay. We are delighted to have Ken Jackson here with us today. Among Ken's accomplishments, he's is currently the Chairman Emeritus of the History Department of Columbia University. He was the former head of the New York Historical Society, a man with real important titles, contributed greatly to the history of the city of New York. But my personal reason for admiring him is for 40 years, Ken ran midnight bike rides that started at 11:30 in the evening and went till dawn and toured New York City literally with hundreds of bike riders. Wow. So,
that was then.
So you're looking at New York City history right here. Now I'm going to read from the prepared notes. Before I do that, I hope everyone likes my tie. Okay? Just bought it for tonight, and I hope it registers. My wife said I shouldn't wear it. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Tonight, we're celebrating a new chapter for 720 West End Avenue, a pre-war landmark reimagined with modern finesse. Originally designed in 1927 by Emory Roth, one of the great architects of New York's golden age, and now beautifully re-envisioned by Thomas Jules Hanson for a new generation. I'm joined tonight, as I've already said, by Professor Kenneth Jackson, Professor Emeritus of History at Columbia University, Editor-in-Chief of the Encyclopedia of New York City. Everyone, buy that book, it's amazing. Former President and Trustee for over 30 years of the New York Historical Society, and one of the foremost voices on New York City's history. As an Upper West Side enthusiast, Ken has taken the time to appreciate and reflect on our conversion story in a foreword that residents will receive as a keepsake along with his book, The Encyclopedia of New York City. Okay, Ken, let's start. Many have said New York is at a crossroads right now. Where are we on the grand arc of the city, in your point of view, and how did we get here?
Thank you, Miles. I have some notes, but the reason is because I could go on for a week on this topic. I taught New York City history for half a century, and love it. And I'm trying to be brief as much as I can. But to that question, I thought I would just say a couple of general comments about the city and its history. Not the 400 years. It's a great failure of New York City to miss the 400th anniversary. That's this year. No other city in the world would let that go past. And I tried to lead a thing where we would have banners everywhere, but the mayor just had other issues on his mind. I thought the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade, the 4th of July, everything. But anyway, so it's the oldest and most important historic place in the United States. Most people don't know that. But let's just talk about its more recent history and think about Emory Roth. And I was thinking about the 20th century. You're probably familiar with 1898 when the city consolidated in the 5 boroughs. Emory Roth was just 27 years old, having come here from what was then Hungary and now Slovenia, I think. But the city was just on the verge of becoming what really it is now, the greatest city in the world. In 1898, it became the second largest city in the world after London, and about to become the most important. In 1917, when the British had too much difficulty financing World War I, Wall Street kind of became the financial center of the world because it kind of took over from Britain. In 1929, in the Great Depression, the worldwide Great Depression, where does it start? Right here in New York City at the New York Stock Exchange. We don't think much about New York in World War II. I did write a little book on that too. But the city had a huge role to play. Most people aren't aware of it, but it was the port of embarkation. So if you were going to fight the Germans, you were leaving from the port of New York, not Baltimore, not Boston, not somewhere else. This was the port. There was one huge marshalling area camp, Shanks, just this side of the Tappan Zee Bridge. And the troops would come not to train in New York, but to come here for a week or 10 days to get everything together. Your will, your shots. Have 2 or 3 days leave in the great city. And then the troop ships would line up in the Hudson River. Quiet. waiting for a convoy, waiting for 60 or 70 ships. So they would just be anchored from the upper bay all the way to the GW Bridge. One day you'd get up and walk on. Middle of the night, no lights. But the city was more than the port of embarkation. By the end of the war, it was the leading industrial center in the world. Most people we don't think of New York as industrial city, but as late as the mid-1950s, it was. Now, of course, that's Berlin and the Ruhr and Tokyo been blown to hell, so that's part of it. But it was also the busiest harbor in the world, had been for almost a century. They could say that as many as 400 ships could be in the 600-mile shoreline of New York City and be loading at the time. And appropriately, when the war was over, one particular day, I think, the troops came back to New York mostly. This is where they left, and a few come back to other places. You know, sometimes there'd be one or two ships, sometimes the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth. Soldiers packed like ants on those ships. They just wanted to come home. If I have to stand up all the way, done. Slept in the empty swimming pools, ate 24 hours a day, the kitchens would go. Anyway, got back. One of the big parades, one of the busiest parades in New York was the 82nd Airborne Division, which represented the 10 million soldiers. The whole division marches up the Canyon of Heroes. They landed in Normandy before the troops did. Middle of the night, no lights on those airplanes, jumping out behind the lines. I wouldn't do it in broad daylight if everybody was, but this is at night, no lights. You're jumping, who knows what you're going to hit, and the Germans are ready to kill you when you get. Anyway, they did it, and it was appropriate that New York is and it launches New York as the center of the world, really. Times Square is at the crossroads of the world. But let's just think of for a moment, and shut me up because.
No, it's great.
It's titillating.
What's different about New York after World War II is, you're a very cultured group, I'm sure, is the European elite tended to look down on Americans. You know, we may have lots of money and lots of other stuff. We're not very sophisticated. Hitler, for example, once said Germany had 268 opera houses. The United States had one. But that was not just for that idiot, but that's kind of what the world thought. After World War II, New York was the only world city which had not suffered tremendous damage and loss of money. London and Paris were impoverished after the war. The families hardly had enough money to heat their apartments or to buy food. And think about Berlin and Tokyo and Moscow and Vienna, lots of other cities. So New York was alone, and not only had that, but think of the cultural ascendance. Leonard Bernstein at the New York Philharmonic, George Balanchine, then the leading choreographer in the world from St. Petersburg, that comes with Lincoln Kirsten to the New York City Ballet, the world's foremost choreographer, the Metropolitan Museum. Even now, the Louvre is a little more famous, but the Metropolitan is actually slightly bigger, and the Louvre gets more visitors. But can you imagine somebody robs a Louvre, in broad daylight?
9:30 in the morning.
Anyway, and the Metropolitan Opera, is still the largest opera in the world. Anyway, so all those kind of things made New York really the center of the world, and the United States, and the UN, and everything else. And then the story is, and that's why I'll be quick here, is the city began to decline as early as the 1950s, but certainly by the 1960s. The harbor, which was one of the three pillars of the economy, it didn't disappear, but they went to container ships. Some of you may have seen On the Waterfront, one of the great American movies. Eva Marie Saint, Carl Norton, and Marlon Brando. It's not a documentary, it's a real movie, but they made it in 1954, just as they were unloading boxes and bags from ships, and there were hundreds of stevedores. And it was a dirty business and rough, and that movie was tough to watch. But containers changed the whole world. You know, though that I'm just making this up, but it's still a busy port, but nothing like it was, because now it takes these giant containers bigger than this room and load it somewhere where they make socks in China, and they stuff 20,000 pairs of socks in the place, seal it. Doesn't matter how long it takes to get here, costs a nickel or shocks to get here. The transportation costs are zero, and the workers. So all those stevedores lost their jobs. And the other thing was the biggest industrial city, as I said, in the world. Women's clothes, the most obvious, and the garment center. But beer, there were one time 90 breweries in New York City. Now there's zero. And they used to make more beer in New York than they did in Milwaukee and St. Louis put together. Now there are some microbreweries around, but the breweries are mostly gone. And it's not just breweries, it's boxes. You know, if you're down at Dumbo and stuff like that, there's boxes and filing cabinets and chewing gum and everything else you can think of. Gonzo. So what about the future? It looks bad temporarily, I think, you know, but we won't get into politics so much, but the city goes essentially bankrupt by the middle of 1970s for a lot of reasons. One was white flight. Looked like everybody was moving to Westchester, Connecticut, New Jersey. Crime and corruption, Serpico, there are a lot of stuff like that. The whole interstate highway system, which undermines the Bronx, but the transportation costs. The Bronx used to have a location advantage, transportation advantage over New Jersey. Well, the George Washington Bridge changes a lot of that. We could get into a lot more detail, but essentially that's what happens. In other doom and gloom movies, Death Wish, I was always a Charles Bronson fan. Always thought I'd be like a Walter Mitty. He would go outside in New York because his wife and daughter were murdered or something happened to. He'd go outside and he would be mugged within 20 minutes. And of course, he'd kill the bad guys. And I love the movie. Once I was in Grand Central and I saw this guy, you know, lying on the stairs, looked like a drunk, and he had money literally hanging out of his pockets. And I thought, if I ever saw a trap, that's one. I wouldn't touch that guy with a pole. But anyway, that happened, and we recovered from the 1975. That's when the financial crisis was. So the question is, for this building, for all the people who are involved in 720 and other buildings in New York, is what happened. I'm writing a book on New York since World War II, but really the guts of it is since the financial crisis. If you take the 15 largest cities in the Midwest and Northeast in 1950 and compare them to 2020, every single one of them declined. Even Boston, Washington, and Philadelphia, and Chicago. Those are the best. But think of the others. Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Newark. You know, the list goes on. Everyone except New York City. The question is, New York City has more people in 2020 than it had in 1950. It's alone of all the cities. There's something about New York City that we all kind of recognize, and that's one of the questions to, and I'll just quickly run through some, you know, obviously I'm talking too long, but so here we go. So what's New York got? And what did it have that Cleveland or Detroit or St. Louis didn't have? And so, first of all, nature, God, what are you going to call location? Whatever else happens to New York, it has maybe the best urban location in the world. It's on what is arguably the best harbor in the world, or biggest. Halifax has a great harbor, but Halifax doesn't have a river that goes anywhere. We have the Hudson River, which potentially connects to Chicago and the Great Lakes through the Erie Canal. So the location is big. Temperate climate. I just came back from LA. I was in Pacific Palisades and Altadena in the middle of the burned out district. New York really doesn't have natural disasters. Say, is he a fool? Well, how about this? We've never had a fire in New York City. We've had a fire department since 1865. No fires since. I don't mean to be crazy. I mean a big fire. A big fire that the fire department couldn't put out. Once I was at the corner of 44th Street and 8th Avenue, 30, don't ask me what I was doing at 44th. But suddenly, looking west, there was flames coming, big flames coming out of the windows. And I was with a professor from the University of Wisconsin, had my job, same job. And I thought, now I'm going to see a big fire. See the fire. In a couple of minutes, the fire department was there. The firemen went in, put the fire out. Within 10 minutes, they were just wandering around like nothing had happened. I couldn't believe it. We have a great fire department. In LA, just to think of it, they're building a city, a great city in the desert, where it doesn't rain, there's not enough water. I won't talk about this much, but the people I went to see, their whole street burned down, never saw a fireman or a fire truck, because they don't have enough. It's too spread out. Anyway, New York doesn't have it. Let's see, you'll talk about hurricanes? Well, there was a hurricane called Sandy. I was here on the Upper West Side. Was it windy outside? Did it rain? I mean, sure, along the Staten Island, along New Jersey shore, South Brooklyn, it was devastating, even lower Manhattan. You know, the subway, number one subway, $500 million it costed to rebuild the number one subway stop at South Ferry. So I'm not saying it never happened. I just mean we've never had a tornado to count. The epidemics, we solved the cholera epidemic in 1866. My hometown of Memphis did not. Anyway, and by the way, I want to say the next thing New York has is toleration. You're looking at one. Southerner, when I came here 50 years ago, a Southern accent, president of the New York Historical Society. You kidding me? They don't give a damn in New York. They just want to know if you can do the job. You know, they're not interested. Do you know anything? And I overstated the case, but I couldn't possibly be president of Charleston, South Carolina, Historical Society, or New Orleans, or Boston. But in New York, there's tolerant. It's a tolerant city, and a lot of people trace it to the Dutch. You know, Anne Hutchinson, Hutchinson River Parkway, she got chased out of Boston because she disagreed about what most of you would say are minor elements of Protestant theology. But they had a trial, said, get out of town. You and anybody thinks like you, Boston's not big enough for you. The Dutch did not care what you thought about God or anybody else. Was your money green? And could you spend, I often say, think about 116th in Amsterdam. Those people are out there selling hot dogs in the January cold. You know, I don't like women. I don't like people with purple hair. I don't like gays. But I'm selling hot dogs. You got your money on the counter. There's a lot of tolerance that goes with capitalism. You know, it's been New York's tradition. It's not perfect. I'm not saying it's perfect. But just think of this. All the peoples of the world just about in New York are in New York. Pakistanis and Indians ready to go to war, nuclear war, over Kashmir. Most of us never heard of Kashmir, couldn't find it on a map. They care, but you know what? And they kill each other. They all live in New York, they all live in Jackson Heights, and somehow, it's like nobody here knows about Kashmir. Why should we kill each other about it? Same with what used to be called Yugoslavia. I was in Bosnia, in a place called Mostar. They have a river not any wider than this road. Muslims on one side, Christians on the other, artillery on both sides, parks have been turned into a cemetery. They all live in New York. It's like nobody here has ever heard of Serbia or Herzegovina or all these other places. Let's get along. They don't kill each other. Or even the Jews and the Muslims. That's happened once or twice on the Brooklyn Bridge. But basically they don't. They all shop on Atlantic Avenue and get along. So anyway, I think that leads to diversity. Another difference of New York. 30, 40 years ago, we thought Tokyo was going to become the next world great city, joining London and New York. No, nobody thinks so. Japan's on its own downward slope because they're so racist there. Koreans are looked down on. Brazilian nurses who've been there for 40 years and have to get out of town. Japan's not, I mean, it's a great city, always will be. Biggest city in the world now, by far. But capital of the world, I don't think so. And just 40 years ago, LA was thought to be the city of the future. And now people don't think that so much anymore. They hope it'll still be a city and they'll be able to rebuild it. We'll see what happens. So I said location, tolerance, diversity, density. Think of Emory Roth in this neighborhood. I get aggravated, some of my friends, and I love Chicago. I went to the University of Chicago. But Chicago's closer to being a farm than it is New York City. Its density is less than half that of New York City. And why? Emory Roth was building, Emory Roth and a few other people, he built 250 buildings. But you see it on the Upper West Side. You see it here. People live in apartment buildings. And even London has 2 floor, in the streets between the avenues. In London, it's 2 or 3 stories. Here, it's 4 or 5 stories. And same thing, it's much more dense than London. And I think we celebrate, so I also mentioned location, density, diversity, toleration, and I think you could celebrate aspiration too. You don't come to New York for its easiness and its graciousness and its, because it celebrates achievement really more than most cities. And I think that's still, so I think that the city's going to, so the trajectory now, I would say, is New York is beginning to turn itself around. It never really declined very far. But I think most people, if you really think about it, crime is incredibly low. I know that if you watch television every night, they have something happening wrong in New York. But it's quality of life crimes. Somebody gets shoved in front of the subway, maybe 6, 8, 10 people a year. Still, millions of people ride it every day. But the murder rate is so low. It's one of the lowest in the United States. Upper West Side, and we can also talk about the Upper West Side. Lincoln Center was a big deal. People used to say you couldn't live up on East. It's just one of the factors. But Upper West Side has all those things that New York has: density, diversity, toleration. Doesn't mean we all love each other, but it's live and let live. I think a lot of it. So anyway, that gets us somewhere. But I hope I haven't gone too far.
I think Ken has answered most of the questions that I was about to ask. But I think most of us believe that New York City is the greatest city on earth, where literally anything is possible. And I just want to, before I ask the next question, just a little bit of trivia, not to embarrass anyone, but you mentioned Leonard Bernstein, and I remember as a kid, he had a Saturday afternoon show where he was bringing the Philharmonic to the masses, to everyday people. Shortly after that show was on, somebody else had a show on ballet, where he brought ballet to the masses, and that was probably America's greatest living dancer and choreographer. His name was Edward Villela, and Krista Villela, sitting right there, is his daughter. Just a bit of New York history. She, incidentally, was a dancer with the American Ballet Theater as well. For those of you who don't know, I never danced for the American Ballet Theater. Okay.
And one of the things we don't realize, and I think because New York is such a cultural center, I think in the world of dance, New York is in a way the world capital. It's not they don't have great dance at the Bolshoi and Hermitage and London and Paris, but if you're going to be a world-class dance company in Germany, you've got to come to New York because it's so diverse, it's so dense, it's so nasty in a way. They don't get, in my hometown of Memphis, if you're going to review the local play, you can't really say nasty things. They're nice people, you know what I mean? And New York is not about nice people. And so I think that's why they trust New York critics.
It is.
All right. We're going to move along because Ken really has answered 5 of the 6 questions on here. But Emory Roth is the very, very famous designer of this building, built it originally. He built the finest buildings in New York City. And so Ken, we'd like to ask you, Emory Roth designed so many of the great apartment houses that still define this neighborhood. What made his work so enduring? And how does a building like 720 West End carry that legacy forward?
Well, I do think that he comes in about 1898, I think. Oh, no, 1871, I'm sorry, when he's 13 years old. When he's born in 1871, that's when the Great Chicago Fire was. Chicago recovered from that disaster, which was probably the worst fire in American history before Los Angeles, and recovered. But Emory Roth comes here at an opportune time because not only is New York City about to become the largest city in the world and the richest, but it's growing incredibly fast. And the Upper West Side, where he built probably more, I want to say 250 buildings, and there's a biography of him that's now for more than $200, published in 1986, called Mansions in the Sky, I think it is. But it's about his career and achievements. But his career mirrored the rise of New York City, especially busy in the 20s and 30s when the city is booming. And the Upper West Side, first of all, I always say I only go to the East Side if I have to, because it's so boring, it's so incredibly boring. But the West Side got the #1 subway, which is the first subway, opens in 1904. And just think of those subway stops up on the West, 50th, 57th, 72nd, 59th, I guess it is, 79th, 86, 96. There the avenues are bigger, streets, across streets, notice, they're 75 feet wide instead of, so when somebody made that decision, actually in 1811, that those streets would be wider than the others, then the subway reinforced it. Anyway, so there was this demand for buildings. Before 1900, before Emory Roth got going, to live in a multi-family building was called a tenement. A tenement was defined as a multi-story building. The Dakota was one of them. The Beresford and other buildings that are around here in the Upper West. This one, in 1927, changed the perception so that now many of the richest people in the world live in tall buildings. And they had to change that perception. New York was in the forefront of that. And Emory Roth, and you could say, was the anti-modernism, Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, those kind of people, like spare rooms and stuff like this. Emory Roth was classical, he liked detail, he liked rooms for people to live in, not just look at. I think it's unbelievable he wrote all of it. If you look at all the buildings he built, it's unbelievable how many he did. And of course his sons went in business with him. But as is often the case, the sons sometimes couldn't carry it on. The building and the company dissolved around, 1990, 1980. But Emory Roth's tradition, I think, lives on in the quality of his buildings, which is why so many people turned to him at the time. And I think 720 West End Avenue is a testimony to the quality of his work and the reputation which endures around his name.
Thank you.
So we have tried very hard at 720 to have a balance between preservation and progress. It has been a pleasure to hear from Ken Jackson He's the very essence of New York. We were delighted to have him, and thank you everyone for coming.
So good. Thank you. History and history.